My name is Sarah. I wear several hats, so community artist, activist, I'm a mom, I'm a partner. My passion always lies in storytelling. I've been working at nonprofits for a long time, and I'm all about creating brands, utilizing graphic design, photography, web design to tell stories, essentially. So here's like kind of a roundup of things throughout the years, but I've been using art as community activism for several years. So just to kind of get into this a little bit. I graduated college in 2009 from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and I was really naive. Like, I grew up on a cow farm. I was not, I felt like I wanted to get out of a small town. So I packed up my suitcase, and after college, I just moved to New York City. And I did it kind of naive. I had like no job. I just knew I needed to be in a space that was diverse with community, being around creatives, just being at like the forefront of like what the hell is going on in all these TV shows. It looks really cool. Like, let me go out there and see what kind of experiences I could get. So my cousin had moved out like 3 months before, so I shared a bed with him, and we just kind of hustled our way through. This was also 2009, which is around where the recession had happened, I think in 2008. So people weren't really hiring folks straight out of college. It would be like, great, you just graduated college, so what's your experience? And I'm like, learning things in college? I don't have experience. So I like to joke that I became sort of the internship queen when I moved to New York City. So I got a job at like CVS Pharmacy. I was just like a beauty advisor, so I learned how to apply eyelashes onto people, and then that was my job at night. And then during the day, my first internship was at a record label. And so again, I went to school for journalism, and it wasn't until my last semester of my senior year that I started learning like Illustrator and Photoshop and InDesign. And so in journalism, we had a student paper, so we were working in InDesign, laying out the newspaper. And so I loved InDesign and coming up with like creative approaches to layout to tell your story. My thought was always like, how can I use storytelling and infuse that with the visual language that we need to get people to pay attention and to pick up the story and read it. And so one of my favorite magazines at the time was Nylon Magazine, and so that was kind of like my dream job, was to go work at Nylon Magazine, be a graphic designer, and tell stories in creative ways through design. And so I didn't fake my resume, but I kind of embellished it, let's say. So, I said that I, knew Photoshop and Illustrator, which I did, but that was also with some YouTube help, figuring out I had to keep downloading a free trial of Photoshop with different emails every, so often, because I was poor, living in New York City. And then I got my first internship at an indie record label. And there I was supposed to help them just like with marketing, but they were like, yeah, we need a designer. And I was like, great, because I'm a designer, I can do this. And so it started off with me just like really being up all night, learning, Googling things like, again, like free trials. And so I was designing poster art for bands, and they would go on tour, and I would design posters within a day. And I would have to learn branding, and I'd have to understand the aesthetic of these bands. And so that was really cool, and it led me into an internship at Nylon Magazine. I basically won an online ticket to a music event, so I had an in with an email address. And so then I emailed them, and I was like, hey, here's all the photos I took at this music event. It was such a great time. Like, here's some content. Also, I have been looking for an internship in graphic design. I'm interested in if you have anything. And so they were like, actually, yes, we would love to talk and learn more. And so when I went to that job interview, it was like the most magical New York days I could have had. I was dressed like to the nines, looking super cute, like going into this fashion magazine thinking I was going to be, a graphic design intern. And on my way in, someone stopped me for like street style photography and was like, we love your street style, can we take your photo? And I'm like, oh my gosh, of course you can. And I'm just like walking into the building thinking like, this is the best thing ever. And it was really fun because, in my interview, it wasn't so much about like, show me your design, show me all these things, but it was like who are you, and do you fit the culture of who we are here, which was a unique way of interviewing. And it also kind of led me to think, this is a place that I think I could really enjoy working at. And so, you know, I showed them some music poster designs and then some college projects. And, you know, because it was an internship, they were like, and we also bonded over Dolly Parton. We both love Dolly Parton. So, and then that day she was like, yeah, like, when can you start? I was like, really? Like, seriously? And yeah, so I started as a graphic designer on the online department there. And so I went 3 days a week. And then the other 3 days I would, or what is 7, 3, 4? You guys, I'm using figures. It's a Friday. I'll get into why my brain is all like this. But yeah, so that was my kind of my first taste. And so the creative director there really guided me to learn more about design. So we actually would do collage art. We'd take old magazines and we would cut them up, we'd go scan them, and then we'd bring them into Photoshop and play around in Illustrator. And it was like taking tangible pieces and mixing them with digital media and like just doing really cool things. And that was kind of the vibe of Nylon at that time. It was just really bringing in cool creatives from mixed media to do some cool things. And also the online department, I know I'm aging myself, but 2009, like that was when Twitter was formed. So like the online department, we were like on the forefront of like doing a really cool way of bringing digital media in like a fun, unique way on a blog. Like, so that was really fun and interesting. I worked there for about 6 months, and then they also, yeah, I thought, I was in this time where I wanted to work at magazines, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. Like I could have probably worked at Nylon my whole life, but I was also itching to get some better, not better, but more leadership, more guidance, more experiences in different departments. So then I went to go and I interned at Teen Vogue. And Teen Vogue was what I thought it would be in design, but it wasn't. I ended up just like working on a couple of runway shows for them and like dressing models, which was totally different than I had wanted to do. But at the time I was just like, yeah, like let me just immerse myself in this industry and see how this is. And so it was really cool though. I think looking back on it, being able to be a part of the entire process of how you put a magazine together from like start to finish and really being immersed into it has always led me to like be a designer in a more holistic way, to really understand people's stories, to really understand the why behind we do what we do in order to create cool and meaningful designs. And so that I thank them for that, but it was also Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, unpaid, and then I'd go manage a hotel in the evenings. And then I'd run home from the train in Brooklyn because my neighborhood was not very safe. So I did this for about another 6 months. They do not do that internship anymore because it's, don't think legal at this point. But at the time, I just wanted the experience. And then this led me to my first paying job at MTV. And so at MTV, I worked for the online department there, and I just created visual graphics. I also, because I came from writing, did some writing as well, but I basically curated stories in a fun and unique way. That was also during the time of the 2012 election. So Ron Paul was like a candidate. Also Jersey Shore was really popular this time. So I did a meme account for MTV during that time for election season where it was literally just photoshopping Snooki poofs onto like different people's heads. And for whatever reason it took off at the time. It was really silly. But I was like, oh, and then that's when I started learning how to make like GIFs and like taking like recording, videos and things, and then like doing overlays in Photoshop and just doing a bit more animation in some of these programs. And so it just kind of got us noticed a little bit in that area, and it was just really fun to mess around, and I got paid to have the creative freedom to do it, which was really cool. Any questions so far? I don't know if this is what you were all expecting, but I'm happy to talk about it.
I think it's super cool about the storytelling part because I really relate to that. I feel like that's the thing that I value in my designs, and I just think that's really cool hearing from another person who really like values that. I also think it's really cool how went from internship to internship, and it's just like, okay, that's not what I really wanted to do. It's just, that's super cool.
Yeah.
For where you came from, where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I thought that like magazine design was what I wanted, and I think at the time I was in fashion, and so I loved the fashion, but I also didn't align with high-end fashion. I didn't align with basically advertising. And so I've always kind of been like, what is at the core of my why? Like, what am I really wanting to do with my life? And then making sure that art or design or storytelling is the vessel for that and wherever I work. And so you look at my resume and it's really long because I've basically worked at places for maybe a year or a year and a half. But what I've learned recently is that's actually okay. Back in the day it wasn't. You'd have to like work somewhere 5 years to know that you're really committed and loyal. But now it's like, actually, is your company a good company to work for? Am I not being burned out? Do you have toxic leadership? I can go all day about this, and you can always email me and we can have coffee about it. But yeah, so I guess before I get to this slide, after I did this, I was in a long-term relationship. We ended up moving to Chicago. I worked at another magazine, indie magazine there, and got into some indie magazine layout design. And so that was really fun, and that was when I started developing websites. So I'm a problem solver through design. So if there's something that I want to design and I can't figure it out, I'm like, I'm going to figure this out right now. I think that way through, I feel like I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, if that makes sense. But at the same time, like, because I've really honed, and I think curiosity is what really fuels like the thread of everything I've ever done. And so I say, yeah, the Indie Magazine, their website was terrible, and we were trying to mix print with digital, and like, how do we combine them to give them the beautiful print experience online, and that it matched. And so, yeah, I developed a WordPress site. So I don't know if anyone works in WordPress at all, but basically, they're super designer friendly. They have like so many great themes. It's very low code, if any. And we still offer them today. It's one of our biggest selling things at Girl Louie, but it's like such a beautiful way to bridge graphic design, storytelling, and really communicate effectively how we communicate these days. And so, oh gosh, what time is that? I'm like, I'm talking about it. Okay, I'm gonna make sure I'm on time. Okay, only 15 minutes. I talk fast. So, yeah, so then after that, I was starting to play with areas I didn't know, and I was starting to be dangerous because I was like, oh gosh, I'll make this website for you, and then I'm Googling HTML, CSS, like trying to figure out like how to make something purple, and it's not easy. So I decided to go to grad school. And grad school for me was more of just like, I've had some taste of like career, and like I've gotten some experiences in different areas, and now I feel like I want to learn more about the things that spark my creativity that I didn't really get to touch in college or in undergrad, because I was still figuring out who I was in undergrad. I was still trying to figure out like what am I doing, you know? And so I ended up going back to my Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. I also miss my family, you know, that's where I was from. And so I ended up getting a teaching assistant job. And so, like I said before, they paid for my school. I got paid to teach, and I got paid to teach like the things that I love, which was Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign. And so I loved going back to college in the new sense, right? I was like best friends with all my professors. I watched their dogs. We'd go out and have a beer. I was like straight A's. And my degree was in new media, which I joke was immediately old. Because media is always changing. But then I kind of got to pick whatever I wanted to do. So I studied HTML, CSS. I studied pencil to pixel. So like really using we used Wacom tablets. I don't know what people use now. I know I'm just like, I feel like I'm old, but maybe. And then I also studied documentary practices. I was really intrigued by being behind a camera lens. And so I bridged all of that during my grad school years. I had my first taste of activism. So during that time, hydraulic fracturing was a big thing that was happening. It was, they were wanting to hydraulic fracture the Shawnee National Forest, which is in Carbondale. And it's like one of the smallest national forests, but it was like, it's always a place where it like was my backyard. Like I would go play. And so we had some threatening things that were happening. So I joined a few like grassroots organizations, and they were like, we need a new logo. I was like, I can do a logo. And I found that like design and storytelling was kind of like my superpower in these groups that were out there putting up flyers. The flyers made no sense. People were like, what the heck is fracking? I mean, people still don't know. But my job, I felt like it was my mission to use design to like build awareness around things that were happening in the world that people should care about. And you can do a detriment if you're designing crappy things. And so I was like, oh, I can do this, I can do this. And so what I really ended up doing was making that my thread, my thesis throughout grad school. So I made a documentary about hydraulic fracturing in the Shawnee National Forest. I went and I interviewed actual homeowners, people with well water that were getting like, toxic or whatever. And then my thesis that I did was I bridged illustration with web design and graphic design, and I did a interactive web comic about hydraulic fracturing. And so the thesis was building social change through interactive web comics. Another thing I've never said is I love comics. I love drawing. I love all of the things. These are things I had when I was little, but I didn't see that through thread until I got to really start being creative with what it was I wanted to do. So I made a choose your own adventure web comic it was like a zombie apocalypse, basically. Like hydraulic fracturing water, turned everyone into zombies, but I got to design zombies, I would illustrate them, and then I'd go in and I hand-coded the entire thing, and it was choose your own adventure. So, what I would do is if you hover over a panel, the CSS would change that panel, and so all of a sudden if you hover over, it would show a hidden thing that you didn't see in the story, or if you hovered over, all of a sudden it was a GIF, and you would have audio playing. So it was this cool black and white tale, and then you could choose which way you wanted to go. And I had a focus group, and so the idea was how can you use design and creative storytelling to really build awareness about something super important? And that was the coolest thing ever. That was sort of my first taste as an art activist, basically. And that's kind of where I am today, in a sense. After that, after grad school, I moved to Colorado. I started getting into nonprofit work. So because I was learning design, videography, all the things, brand management was something that I had a title in, which was kind of like a catch-all for being creative and being smart and savvy, storytelling, and then also using that as a form of marketing. So I worked at YMCA of the Rockies, where it was at a resort, and there were elk that would come up to us every day, and it was the coolest thing. I went from New York to in the Rocky Mountains. I was I gotta get away and figure myself out again. And then after that, I met my partner and we moved to St. Louis. So St. Louis is close to home. It's where a lot of my cousins live, and now we have 2 kids, and it's beautiful. I love St. Louis. Basically what happened was I kind of started trying to break out and freelance more and more. I found that the jobs I was in was very limiting to how I wanted to be creative, or where I wanted to go creatively. So no one really believed in me like I believed in myself. And so like I said, after a year or 2, I would be in these jobs that were probably underpaying me, and at the time I didn't really care. Or it was toxic leadership where I was kind of gaslit the whole time into thinking oh, I've got to earn my way up the ladder, even though I had my graduate degree and I had all this experience, and I was really good at the jobs I did because I cared. And so the second time I went out as a freelancer, it wasn't always successful, but the second time I went out as a freelancer was in October of 2019. I had just gotten done as the brand manager of Launch Code here in St. Louis, and one of my first clients was a nonprofit that just started called Run for Women, and they had no branding, no web design, so I designed their entire branding for them. And not only that, but what I had learned throughout the years was the visual design doesn't matter if you don't know your why behind why you're designing. And so it was really getting to know their mission, why it mattered, and then also coming up with brand positioning, personality, their voice. So my hands kind of touch a lot in different areas that really influence the design process. And so that was happening, and then as we know, March of 2020, it was the pandemic, and we all didn't know what was going on, but there were a lot of resources in the community. There were a lot of things happening that I remember on social, we were all just trying to figure out what the F was going on, and there were so many things coming out of the woodwork. There was so much social unrest with a lot of the things that had been happening throughout the nation. Trump was president. Don't know how y'all feel, but it was just it was wild times. And so I started using my Instagram, which I thought was for my business, to actually just do creative freedom for the first time really ever. I know that sounds weird. I think in grad school I had that creative freedom, but I had always been designing under the lens or under the guise of the brands that I worked for. So I felt like I needed something that connected to me. And so then I just started designing things that were loud and just like connected to people. And I think the thread through all of this was that like, I think being a marketer, being someone who understood brands, like to me, I had to design something that like shook people up, that like got people to pay attention. It wasn't just something that was pretty, it was something that had a why reason behind it, also a reason to connect us all together as a community. And so I started playing around with just like different typefaces, graphics. I would go into Illustrator, take it into Photoshop, I would like layer it up and just like really hack it up. I don't know if I should say this in college, like maybe you should hack up your stuff, but I think being a creative, you have to get into the process and you have to mess up in order to discover like what it is that you're doing. Like half the time I feel like with design, it's always about accidentally stumbling down a creative like pathway, and then that like sparks more ideas for me. And so this is kind of like how things were. Cori Bush was running at the time. I just made this like really quickly, and then she reposted it on her Instagram and it called out Girl Louie, and I was like, oh my gosh. My hero just posted a graphic I made of her, and then later she got elected, or you know, she was elected as our representative, and then I met her the next day at a client thing, and I was like, I'm the artist that blah blah blah, and she was like, oh my god, Sarah, hi, and I was like, you know my name, like that was like the most like fangirl thing that had ever happened. But what I saw was that like people were resonating with this stuff because it was just interesting and creative. And so what I did with that is I decided to take all of the things that we were all talking about on social and wrap it up into a newsletter. And so at the time, it was really just trying to connect with other women for me because I was alone, I had just had a baby, I had no sense of community. So I created a newsletter called Smart Girls STL, and it was this idea that like, we're smart, we can get together, we have resources, like let's own that and like build a community together from that. And because I was freelancing at the time, I didn't feel like I had too much responsibility. I was like, why don't I just like get a billboard and like design something and put that up there? And so I rented a billboard and I put Smart Girls Live in St. Louis, and I just put my thing out there. And before I knew it, like people were taking pictures, they were like, what the heck is this? And it was this thing where it didn't make any sense, but I liked it. And it was just a weird thing, and it ended up just sparking attention and awareness. So St. Louis Magazine covered it. I won like an A-list award for like best social media account. I didn't know until months later that I got it, and I was like, well shit, that was pretty cool. But yeah, so I find that like doing things a little differently, being okay with being a little weird actually is really good for you. It actually makes you stand out from all the noise, and it allows you to create and evoke emotion and connect with your audience in the way that feels most authentic to you. And I think your audience feels that too. So after that happened, we made a mural in the Grove, and I'll tell you a little bit about how this happened. This is a news coverage that came from that. But during this time, there was a lot of sexual assault awareness that was happening in the Grove here in St. Louis. And so, survivor of sexual assault myself, some friends and I got together and we were like, what can we do? What can we do? So what was happening, it was a few bar owners and business owners that were in the Grove, and they were using their lawyers and silencing all of these survivors that were coming out. And it was, I'm telling you, tens and tens of survivors coming out on social, spreading awareness around it. And so we were like, okay, these are bullies. Like, they're clearly trying to silence people who have been impacted by this. And so we decided to paint a mural in that same area where the businesses were, and we spun it into a positive way to let survivors know that, like, hey, we see you're being silenced online, but how can we take art and use it in a way to like really love and nurture communities and show them that we care. And so yeah, I made this design and then we projected it on a mural. I've never done a mural before, but I was like, I can figure this out. But we projected it at night, made it on Illustrator, projected it, just chalked it out with chalk. And then the next day we came together and we painted it like paint by numbers. And it was super easy. But we busted this out in 3 days. This is actually on the side of Urban Chestnut in the Grove on Manchester. If you go by it, it's freaking huge. And these, I don't know if you can tell, are cinder blocks. They're not actual bricks. So it just ate our paint up, again, I had some like money in my pocket, so I bought some more paint, but then people started donating things. Someone donated a lift. We had a paint company donate paint. And what we knew was that like the community really took to this because they too were seen and they heard, and we were all just trying to figure out what the hell do we do to help these people. So now people still to this day take their picture with it. It's still a sign, it's still a stamp in our community that makes people feel safe and feel heard and seen. And then from that, like, I was like, shit, I can make art and be an activist and do these cool things. Let me just continue to do this. So that's basically what Girl Louie has been doing for a few years now. So we did another thing where Steve's Hot Dogs got busted in, so we decided to, paint a really cool mural. They had just announced that they were going to be at the soccer stadium, and it kind of took away from this like positive thing that happened because then they just got broken into. So we painted the door, and then the news came out. We're like, this is how you can make things more positive. I used to, so Unhoused STL, there were tents all over for houseless folks, and so what we did was paint messages on there about how housing is a human right. So you would see these tents everywhere, and it made a really cool message. We've done, Pro-Choice Missouri, even just like a hair care place was like, hey, we want to talk about gender inclusivity with hair. And so I'm like, okay, let's make something. And so now we have t-shirts and things like that, and it's pretty cool. And then another campaign I did was with Run for Women, my client at the time. Again, I just love using billboards as a way to tell messages throughout the city. So basically we did a love note campaign to everyone. It garnered attention, brought the media out, and it was just a fun experience. So now that leads me to here today. I now work full-time at Girl Louie. We have a team of 5 of us. Alexis is one of them. And we're all creatives in our own way. So some of us are creatives by, photography, videography. Others are creatives by strategic partnerships. Like, I use creative very loose. So I think you have to be creative to do a lot of things successfully. So I'm also a creative problem solver. I'm creative at solving problems. I'm creative at telling stories. And so I think too, it's a lot of reframing around what does it mean to be a creative? What does it mean to be a designer? What does it mean to be an artist? And so, yeah, this is kind of my journey, and I'm really excited to talk about it. And I hope this is what you expected, or you're okay with what I said. I don't know why you wouldn't be, but basically, hopefully, this gives you some insights into things. I would love any questions about where you are, where you're going, questions about my journey, because I think too, just jumping into opportunities, not being afraid to be curious and to get your hands dirty in things that might feel intimidating is the point of all of it. So yeah, and that's my talk.